Welcome to Proportional Equations. Let's start out with a problem. The town library is raising money by selling old books. The table shows the number of books sold, the x, and the amount of money raised, the y. And our job is to write an equation that can be used to find the amount of money raised if the number of books sold is known. When you see a table like this, you know it's a proportional relationship because no matter what x you put in, we're always going to multiply by 2 to get the y. Remember the constant of proportionality, which is y divided by x, here is going to be 2. Because 20 divided by 10 is 2, 80 divided by 40 is 2, and no matter what x we put in, if we multiply by 2, we're going to get the y. So if we want to write an equation to find the amount of money, well, that's the x, or that relates the amount of money and the number of books sold, that's the y. We're looking for something to fill in this blank. Y is equal to something times x. And of course, that number is 2. Because no matter what number we put in for x, we multiply by 2 and we get y. This equation represents the situation. Y is equal to 2 times x. Now let's use the equation to find the amount of money we raised if 53 books are sold. I have to ask, 53 books, is that the x or the y? It's the x. I can use the equation like this. Y is equal to 2x, and substitute in 53, which means $106. 2 times 53. Similarly, we can use that equation to find the number of books that need to be sold, that's the x, in order to raise $194, that's the y. Same equation, y is equal to 2x, and now 194 is where the y was. We substituted in there. And we need to use a little algebra to solve this. Divide both sides by 2, x is equal to 87. So 87 books need to be sold. Okay, so we're doing this because every proportional relationship can be written in the form y is equal to kx. Every single proportional relationship takes this form as an equation. And that's where y is the dependent variable, x is the independent variable, and k is the constant of proportionality that you've been working on. Equations that are not in the form y equals kx, if you can't figure out what the k is, if they're in a different form, then they are not proportional. Okay, so if we looked at a list of equations, like here, and we wanted to figure out which ones are proportional, we need to remind ourselves that we're looking for y is equal to kx. The first equation is definitely in that form. 3 is the constant of proportionality. The second equation is not, because a number is being added to x. The third equation is in that form. Even though x is the dependent variable and z is the independent variable, it's still in the form y equals kx. The constant of proportionality is 9. D is proportional because 2/3 is the constant of proportionality. What do you think about E and F? Well, E is proportional. The constant of proportionality is negative 0.5. But F is not. Even though it has 3b, which looks proportional, the adding 5 part makes it not proportional. All right, let's look at some other examples. Let's remind ourselves, or actually let's identify this important strategy. Before we write an equation, we need to always set up a table. That's because if we set up a table, it's going to help us to identify the constant of proportionality, and that's all you need to write an equation. Here's what I mean. If you're shopping for apples and you know the price falls under this graph, let's set up a table. We know that the number of pounds in, that's in the x position, that's the independent variable. And the cost in dollars, C, that's the dependent variable, x and y. So even though in this problem we've got two different variables, we know that we need to make a table so that the number of pounds is where the x usually is, and the cost is where the y usually is. And this is super important because it's so easy to mix these up if you're not being careful. Now all we need to do is we need to find a point, or maybe several points. So I'm going to pick this one here. That's where the pounds are 2 and the cost is 4. And just because, I'll pick another point. The pounds are 4 and the cost is 8. Next, let's identify the constant of proportionality. Remember, the constant of proportionality is y divided by x. So in this case, the constant of proportionality is 4 divided by 2, or 2. Finally, we need to write an equation. And when we're writing an equation, it's always going to take the form y is equal to kx. Except in this case, instead of y, we're going to use the c. So we know it's going to be c is equal to k, which is the constant of proportionality, times n, the number of pounds. And from here we're basically done. C is equal to 2n. And that makes sense because whatever the number of pounds is, we multiply it by 2 and we get the cost. If we need to solve this problem, how many pounds of apples can you buy for $19? Well, let's remember that the 19 is the dependent variable, it's the c. And let's plug it into our equation. 19 is equal to 2n. And then let's solve. Divide by 2. So n is equal to 8.5. You can get 8.5, 8.5 pounds of apples. Alright, one more for us to do together before you do some practice. And this one's a particularly tricky one, even though it looks simple. A painter mixes 2 parts red paint and 8 parts yellow paint to make orange paint. Which equation represents the relationship between red and yellow paint? Now, when I see equation and proportionality, I'm just going to remind myself y is equal to kx, because that's the form it takes. But here, there's nothing that tells me what's the dependent and what's the independent variable. There's no way to tell which should be y and which should be x, except when we look at the answer choices. In the answer choices, the r is always in the y position. It's over on the left side, where the y is always in the x position. It's on the right side. It's being multiplied by something in this case. So that tells us that we should see what happens if we set up a situation where the r is the dependent variable, kind of like the y, and the y is the independent variable. Now let's use the information that's in the problem. Remember, always set up a table. It will help you out so much. 2 parts red paint and 8 parts yellow paint. So we've got 8 yellows and we have 2 reds. From this information, the constant of proportionality, don't make the mistake of saying 4 because you see that 2 times 4 is 8. You've got to go from the independent variable to the dependent variable. You've got to go in this direction. And you've got to do the y divided by the x. Or in this case, the r divided by the y. So that's going to be 2 divided by 8. The constant of proportionality is 1/4. It's not 4. Which is why this is the correct equation. Looking at the other answer choices, you can actually use some process of elimination. This is not proportional. So it doesn't work. If we look at equation A, r is equal to 4y, would it make sense that we take 8 parts yellow, multiply it by 4, and get 2 parts red? Nope, wouldn't work. And this might be tempting because you see 2r and 8y, but it doesn't work either. Because if we take 8 parts yellow and plug it in, 8 times 8 is 64, and that's no way equal to 2 times 2, or 4. So this one doesn't work either. All right, so good luck writing equations. Remember to always set up a table, and once you're done, check your work with the control, and good luck.